My husband accused me of cheating and kicked me out as soon as I got pregnant, all because a fertility test said he was sterile. Heartbroken, I filed for divorce. But everything changed when he discovered his own mother had faked the results to tear us apart and sabotage our marriage. At 25 years old, I find myself needing to share the story of my husband and how our life together unraveled in the most terrible manner imaginable. For more than 2 years, my husband and I had been attempting to conceive a child, and this pursuit transformed into a significant source of strain within our marriage. Each passing month without a positive pregnancy result felt like another setback, leading us to question if one of us had an issue, or if we simply needed to exercise more patience with the entire journey. Approximately 2 months ago, I finally received the positive test we had eagerly anticipated. My excitement was overwhelming. I could scarcely contain it when I informed my husband. He appeared pleased as well, though I observed a certain quietness about him, more subdued than I had anticipated. We chose to host an intimate announcement gathering with both our families, desiring to impart the joyful news to everyone who had supported us throughout this endeavor. The celebration proceeded smoothly, with all our loved ones offering congratulations and discussing potential baby names and nursery concepts. However, something shifted in my husband after that event. I began to perceive a new distance and coldness in his demeanor towards me, unlike anything I had ever experienced from him. He would return from work and barely address me, and whenever I attempted to engage him in conversation about baby arrangements or upcoming medical appointments, he would respond curtly, then invent reasons to exit the room or occupy himself elsewhere. I persistently inquired about what was troubling him, or if the pregnancy itself was a concern, but he would simply attribute it to work fatigue or a preoccupied mind, offering no genuine clarification. This pattern continued for several weeks, and my frustration grew steadily. I was contending with morning sickness and all the early physiological changes of pregnancy, desperately needing my husband's emotional support during this period. Instead, he behaved as though I had offended him, or as if he no longer wished to be in my presence. I made several attempts to discuss with him how his conduct was impacting me, and how crucial his attentive support was, yet nothing seemed to reach him. 3 weeks ago, I finally reached my absolute limit. I could no longer endure living in a home where my own husband regarded me as a stranger. I informed him that unless he could clarify the situation and resume behaving as an affectionate partner, I would gather my belongings and stay with my mother until he resolved whatever was afflicting him. It was at this juncture that everything erupted in the most catastrophic manner. He began shouting accusations of infidelity at me, declaring that there was no conceivable way the baby could be his, as he possessed test results indicating his infertility. He had concealed this information for weeks without uttering a single word to me. I was utterly stunned not only by the accusation of an affair, something I would never contemplate, but also by the fact that he had undergone fertility testing without any prior discussion with me, and then deliberately withheld the findings while treating me appallingly for weeks. I attempted to assure him that the accusation was entirely baseless, and that I had never been disloyal to him in any capacity. However, he refused to heed anything I said, persistently asserting that the sole explanation for my pregnancy was a liaison with another person. He shrieked about my alleged betrayal and the ruination of our marriage, then instructed me to secure a paternity test to confirm the baby's parentage or remain estranged from him indefinitely, as he wished to avoid my presence. He then literally expelled me from our residence while I was pregnant, telling me to reside with whomever I had supposedly been unfaithful with. I had no recourse but my mother's house, so overcome with shock and distress that coherent thought was impossible. I spent that night weeping, attempting to comprehend how my marriage had disintegrated so abruptly and utterly. The following day, I consulted an attorney and initiated divorce proceedings, having realized that my husband harbored no trust in me whatsoever, and had chosen to credit the most negative possible scenario without any substantiation. 2 days ago, my husband appeared at my mother's residence, looking utterly shattered. He informed me that he had unearthed a dreadful truth concerning his mother and uncle, which illuminated everything that had transpired between us. He confessed to feeling profoundly despondent about our separation, and had sought out his mother for a conversation. While there, he inadvertently overheard an exchange between his mother and his uncle that unveiled a conspiracy I could never have conceived. His uncle manages a fertility clinic, and it appeared his mother had persuaded the uncle to falsify my husband's test results, fabricating a diagnosis of infertility. Her motive behind this was to sow seeds of doubt in my husband's mind regarding my fidelity. My husband discovered that his mother had systematically poisoned his perception of me for years, making disparaging remarks about my mother's past romantic life, and implying I might emulate her by engaging in clandestine affairs. My own mother had dated several different individuals before my conception, and had been candid about enjoying casual relationships in her 20s. However, upon discovering her pregnancy, she entirely transformed her lifestyle, dedicating herself wholly to raising me as a single parent. My mother-in-law had evidently concluded that my mother's history rendered her an unsuitable individual, and she had spent years instilling in my husband the notion that I might have inherited my mother's supposed inclination towards promiscuity, warning him to be cautious about granting me his complete trust. The fertility test outcomes were entirely fraudulent. My husband is not infertile in the slightest. This meant his uncle had intentionally supplied false medical information to dismantle our marriage, at his sister's behest. My husband wept as he recounted all of this, imploring me to return home and endeavor to mend things, recognizing he had been manipulated by his own kin into doubting me and ruining our bond. Yet, I communicated that I could not simply forgive and forget what had occurred. Despite his mother and uncle deceiving him, he had still chosen to believe I was capable of treachery without any supporting evidence, and had expelled me from our shared home while I was carrying his child. I articulated that his readiness to embrace the worst conclusion about me demonstrated a profound lack of true understanding or trust, and such a foundational flaw in our relationship could not be rectified merely by the revelation of his family's deceptions. He repeatedly expressed remorse, affirming his love and desire to rectify matters, but I conveyed my need for time to reflect on everything, stating I was not prepared to make any decisions about our future together. The divorce papers have already been submitted, and I remain uncertain whether I wish to halt the process or attempt to reconstruct our marriage, as I struggle to overcome the fact that he was so swift to assume my infidelity, and so willing to discard our relationship based on mere suspicions, rather than genuinely discussing his apprehensions with me. I wish to offer some additional insight regarding my mother's circumstances, as I believe it is crucial for comprehending the specific targeting by my mother-in-law. My mother was never indiscriminately promiscuous in a manner that caused harm or relational difficulties. Rather, she consistently maintained honesty with the men she dated about her intentions and whether she sought a serious commitment or a more casual arrangement. During her 20s, she explored different relationships as she endeavored to discern her aspirations in life, and the type of partner who would bring her contentment, an exploration that is entirely acceptable, as long as all parties are truthful and respectful. Upon learning of her pregnancy with me, my mother promptly ceased dating and devoted herself wholly to preparing for impending motherhood. She diligently strived to provide for me and cultivate a stable, affectionate home atmosphere. She resumed her education during my early years to secure a superior employment opportunity and support us more comfortably, sacrificing a considerable portion of her social life and personal leisure to ensure I possessed everything I required throughout my upbringing. My mother-in-law had evidently concluded that any individual who had engaged in casual relationships was inherently flawed and unreliable. Consequently, she had spent years making veiled remarks to my husband, insinuating that I might have inherited my mother's perceived character deficiencies. She would utter statements emphasizing the importance of truly knowing me before extending full trust, and she would recount anecdotes about women who had betrayed their spouses and fractured their families, invariably weaving in some allusion to how these women had mothers who lacked exemplary roles. Reflecting now, I can discern how she progressively instilled uncertainty in my husband's thoughts throughout the entirety of our relationship. At the time, however, I simply perceived her as being excessively protective of her son, a common trait among certain mothers-in-law. I never grasped that she was actively striving to sabotage our marriage based on her censorious opinions regarding my mother's history, nor did I ever imagine she would proceed to such lengths as involving her brother in fabricating medical test outcomes to engineer a crisis in our union. This marks my initial update, occurring 2 weeks subsequent to my initial post. I wish to inform everyone about the developments concerning my husband and his family's deceptive actions. I have thoroughly reviewed all the comments on my original entry, and I genuinely appreciate each person who dedicated their time to offer thoughts and encouragement. Navigating this ordeal has been profoundly isolating and perplexing, and it was comforting to hear from individuals who comprehended the grave misconduct of both my husband and mother-in-law. After nearly 2 weeks of contemplation and discussions with my mother and a professional counselor, I reached the conclusive decision to inform my husband that I would not be returning to our marriage and that I intended to proceed with the divorce as planned. I telephoned him and elucidated that, irrespective of his mother's prolonged manipulation, he had still made the conscious choice to doubt me without any justifiable reason. Furthermore, he had opted to undergo fertility testing without prior consultation with me, which underscored a fundamental deficit in communication and trust within our relationship. I conveyed that I was particularly wounded by the disrespectful manner in which he had spoken about my mother during our altercation, as my mother had exerted immense effort to alter her lifestyle and provide me with a wholesome upbringing, and she did not deserve to have her past weaponized against her as if it reflected on my character or reliability. I explained that healthy relationships necessitate partners to engage in open dialogue about their concerns, rather than covertly investigating one another and making baseless assumptions about disloyalty. A few days subsequent to that phone discussion, my husband appeared at my mother's residence, requesting an in-person conversation. He seemed genuinely contrite about all that had transpired, yet I found his rationale for seeking reconciliation somewhat inconsistent. He continuously spoke of his profound affection for me and his desire to be present for me during the pregnancy, but I countered that he had shown no concern for my pregnant state when he was expelling me from our home and accusing me of deceit. Thus, his sudden solicitude for my well-being appeared to stem more from his own remorse than from genuine care for me and the unborn child. During our discussion, I made it unequivocally clear that I held him equally accountable for the collapse of our marriage. While his mother and uncle had undeniably manipulated and misled him, his inherent insecurities and readiness to believe the worst about me had initially enabled their harmful influence to take root. I told him that a secure and loving partner would have approached me with questions or apprehensions regarding fertility, rather than clandestinely undergoing tests, and then erupting in anger when the outcomes did not align with his expectations. I also elucidated that even if we could somehow overcome the trust issues and the painful words and actions, I could not envision attempting to reconstruct a relationship while knowing his mother actively disdained me and had exerted such effort to ruin our marriage. I conveyed that I would never again feel at ease or safe in his mother's presence, and I could not fathom how we could maintain a functional family dynamic when one of his closest relatives had demonstrated such manipulative and cruel tendencies. My husband endeavored to argue that we could circumvent his mother's interference by restricting her contact with us and establishing firm boundaries. However, I explained that the damage was already done, and I lacked confidence in his ability to uphold those boundaries should his mother continue to exert her influence over time. I reminded him that she had been subtly swaying his perceptions of me for years without his awareness, and I could not be assured that he would not revert to those patterns of doubt and suspicion if she persisted in her agenda. He seemed to grasp the seriousness of my decision regarding the divorce, so he inquired if we could at least pursue couples counseling to explore any possibility of restoring trust between us. I responded that I was not opposed to counseling for the purpose of learning effective co-parenting strategies, but I was not interested in attempting to salvage our romantic relationship, as too much irreparable harm had occurred for me to feel safe and secure with him once more. The conversation concluded with him affirming his respect for my decision, despite his devastation, and he asked if we could, at the very least, endeavor to maintain a civil rapport for the sake of the baby. I concurred that our focus should be on establishing effective co-parenting, but I emphasized that any custody arrangements would need to include stipulations that ensured his mother and uncle remained entirely separate from our child, as I would not permit them any influence over my baby's life after their actions toward our family. This serves as my second update, approximately 3 weeks following the first. The divorce proceedings have been advancing, and we have been addressing all the legal and financial particulars with minimal direct interaction between my husband and myself. This arrangement has proven beneficial for both of us, as every conversation we previously had quickly became emotionally charged and arduous. My legal representative has managed the majority of communication with his attorney, enabling us to make progress on the equitable division of our assets and liabilities without repeatedly recounting the painful specifics that led to our separation. My former husband has also initiated legal action against his uncle and the fertility clinic for providing fraudulent medical information and interfering with our marital union. While I am not directly involved in that litigation, I sincerely hope my husband achieves some measure of justice for the harm his family inflicted upon us. I have not yet reached any definitive decisions regarding custody arrangements, as I am still endeavoring to process all that has occurred and determine what would genuinely serve the baby's best interests. Nevertheless, I am certain I desire primary custody, at least initially, given I will be breastfeeding and primarily responsible for the day-to-day infant care during the initial months. I have considered that eventually we might be able to establish some form of shared custody arrangement, but I wish to observe how my husband undertakes the responsibilities of fatherhood, and whether he can maintain appropriate boundaries with his mother before I consent to any overnight visits or extended periods of separation from me. My mother has been an invaluable source of support throughout this entire process. She has accompanied me to all my prenatal appointments and assisted me in preparing for the baby's arrival, which has meant a great deal to me, as I had always envisioned my husband performing these duties alongside me. The pregnancy has progressed without complication despite the considerable stress, and my doctor affirms that the baby appears healthy and developing well, although she has advised me to strive to minimize stress and prioritize self-care during this challenging period. I have been grappling with feelings of guilt concerning the fact that my child will not have the stable two-parent home I had always hoped to provide. I sometimes worry whether I am curtailing my baby's potential for happiness by refusing to reconcile with my husband. However, I also acknowledge that two distinct parents who are healthy and stable might prove more advantageous for a child than a single dysfunctional family marred by constant tension and distrust. I firmly believe my baby will thrive more effectively growing up in an environment where both parents hold mutual respect, even if they are not romantically united. I have been consulting a counselor to assist me in navigating these complex emotions and preparing for the demands of single parenthood. She has been instrumental in helping me concentrate on controllable aspects, rather than dwelling on all the ways I had hoped things would unfold differently. I am striving to maintain a positive outlook on the future, and focus on the certainty that I will soon have a beautiful baby who will be cherished by both parents, even if we will not all reside together as a single family unit. The most arduous aspect has been confronting all the practical adjustments that accompany divorce and single parenthood, such as arranging health insurance, childcare provisions, and ensuring I possess all necessities to care for an infant independently. My mother has generously offered all the assistance she can provide, and I have several close friends who have been very supportive, yet it remains overwhelming to contemplate how dramatically different my life will be from what I had planned and meticulously prepared for over the past few years. My third update arrives approximately 3 months later, as our divorce approached its finalization. My husband and I were required to meet in person to discuss custody arrangements and determine the practicalities of co-parenting our child. The meeting actually transpired far better than I had anticipated. We engaged in a productive discussion about what would genuinely benefit our child, without descending into arguments about our failed marriage or rehashing all the hurtful events that had occurred between us. We agreed that the baby should primarily reside with me during the initial several months, particularly while I am breastfeeding and establishing feeding and sleeping routines. However, my husband would be able to visit regularly and spend time fostering a bond with the baby throughout the day. We determined that overnight visits would likely not be appropriate until the baby is older and has a more established schedule, but once our child reaches approximately 6 months of age, we could begin transitioning to a more equitable custody arrangement, where the baby spends roughly half the week with each of us. I was pleasantly surprised by my husband's reasonableness and thoughtfulness during this conversation. He appeared genuinely dedicated to being an excellent father and prioritizing our child's welfare, rather than attempting to leverage custody as a means to pressure me into reconsidering our divorce. He acknowledged that his actions had precipitated our separation, and that he understood why I could not sufficiently trust him to reconstruct our romantic relationship. Nevertheless, he expressed hope that we could, at the very least, cultivate a respectful co-parenting partnership for our baby's sake. He also offered an apology for his absence in supporting me throughout the pregnancy thus far and inquired if he could begin attending prenatal appointments with me, thereby involving himself in preparing for the baby's arrival and learning about what to anticipate during labor and delivery. I consented to his attendance at future appointments, provided he understood our roles were solely as co-parents, not as a couple, and that I did not wish him to interpret my willingness to include him as an indication of reconsidering our divorce. A point on which we both felt strongly was the complete exclusion of his mother and uncle from our child's life. My husband actually initiated this topic himself, without me having to insist, which demonstrated his profound understanding of the gravity of their interference and the extent of the damage they had inflicted upon our family. He affirmed his complete disinterest in reconciling with either of them, and expressed willingness to incorporate legal stipulations into our custody agreement to ensure they could never have any contact with our baby. We also deliberated on the financial aspects of child support, and my husband informed me that he planned to allocate half of any funds he eventually receives from his lawsuit against his uncle and the fertility clinic to ensure our child has everything necessary for a comfortable and secure upbringing. I appreciated this gesture, as it indicated his earnest commitment to providing for our baby. The conversation extended for several hours, and by its conclusion, I felt more optimistic about our capacity to collaborate as parents. I could perceive that my husband was genuinely remorseful about the past events, and that he was dedicated to being a good father. I began to feel that perhaps we could forge a functional co-parenting relationship that would bestow upon our child the stability and affection every baby deserves. After his departure, I realized that much of my anger towards him had dissipated over the preceding months. While I still felt hurt and disappointed by the dissolution of our marriage, I was no longer consumed by bitterness or resentment toward him. I believe that time and emotional distance had aided me in processing all that had occurred, and I was beginning to feel prepared to focus on the future rather than fixating on all the ways our relationship had gone awry. This is the fourth update, delivered 2 months after our divorce was officially concluded. I wanted to apprise everyone of the progress with my former husband and our ongoing preparations for the baby's advent. My ex-husband has consistently attended my prenatal appointments, as we previously discussed, and he has also been visiting me regularly to spend time together and converse about infant preparations. This engagement has been far more constructive and supportive than I had anticipated, given the tumultuous end to our marriage. The baby has recently become considerably more active, and my ex-husband has been able to feel the kicks and movements during his visits, which has been truly exhilarating for him, and has rendered the pregnancy a more tangible and immediate reality for both of us. He has been engrossed in parenting literature and diligently researching all aspects of newborn care, appearing genuinely enthusiastic about becoming a father. This has been reassuring for me, as I desire our child to have a father who is truly dedicated to being present and engaged. During one of our recent conversations, my ex-husband offered a direct apology to both myself and my mother for crediting his family's falsehoods about us, and for permitting their manipulation to dismantle our marriage. He seemed genuinely remorseful for how he had allowed his mother to sway his thoughts and emotions regarding me over the years. He conveyed that he had undertaken extensive introspection and counseling to comprehend his susceptibility to his mother's harmful influence. He stated that he had always harbored insecurities about his adequacy for me, which made him more inclined to accept suggestions that I might be unfaithful or untrustworthy. He inquired of both of us if there was any method by which he could demonstrate he was not a terrible individual, but simply someone who had been misled and manipulated by people he trusted. He expressed a desire to dedicate the remainder of his life to atoning for his errors and being the finest father and co-parent he could possibly be. My mother and I discussed his proposition privately and concluded that we were willing to extend forgiveness and move forward with a positive co-parenting relationship. We recognized that we would all need to collaborate for many years to raise our child, and clinging to anger and resentment would benefit no one. I also reiterated my requirement that his mother and uncle be legally prohibited from having any contact with our child, and my ex-husband immediately agreed without any dispute or resistance. This demonstrated his genuine understanding of how perilous and damaging their influence had been on our family. He affirmed that he had completely severed ties with both of them and had no intention of ever readmitting them into his life, let alone granting them access to his child. We have been working with our legal representatives to finalize all custody documentation, incorporating specific provisions to keep his family members away from our baby, and everything should be formally signed and submitted within the coming weeks. I feel content with the arrangements we have made, and I believe we have established a framework that will enable our child to cultivate robust relationships with both parents while being shielded from the kind of manipulation and toxicity that shattered our marriage. My ex-husband has also been assisting me in preparing the nursery and organizing everything for the baby's arrival at my mother's house. While it is undoubtedly peculiar to undertake these tasks as divorced co-parents rather than an excited married couple, I am thankful that our child will have a father who is genuinely enthusiastic about parenthood and committed to being involved from the very outset. I believe that our capacity to collaborate respectfully and prioritize what is best for our baby illustrates that we have both grown and matured through this arduous experience. This is the conclusive update, delivered 1 week subsequent to my son's birth. Though I am utterly fatigued, I wish to impart a final account regarding my son's arrival and the ongoing dynamics with my former husband and our new co-parenting framework. I commenced labor approximately a week ago, following a pregnancy that, mercifully, remained healthy and uncomplicated despite the considerable stress and emotional turbulence of the preceding months. After an exceptionally protracted labor, spanning nearly 20 hours, I finally gave birth to a beautiful and robust baby boy. Both my mother and my ex-husband were present at the hospital throughout the entirety of the labor and delivery process. Their combined support made an immense difference in helping me navigate what was undeniably the most physically demanding experience of my life. My ex-husband proved incredibly helpful and supportive during the labor, and he appeared genuinely excited and profoundly amazed when our son was finally born, which was truly moving to witness, notwithstanding all that had transpired between us. Since our return home from the hospital, my ex-husband has been staying with us for several days to assist with all aspects related to caring for a newborn. He has been sleeping on the sofa and aiding with diaper changes, feeding times, and all the exhausting round-the-clock responsibilities that accompany having an infant. He has not voiced any complaints or acted as though he was doing me a favor by assisting. Instead, he seems genuinely thrilled to embrace fatherhood and eager to absorb all knowledge pertaining to caring for our son. I can perceive that he is completely enamored with the baby, spending hours simply holding him, conversing with him, and marveling at all his tiny features and movements. This has been truly wonderful to observe, as I desire our son to have a father who genuinely loves and cherishes him. The custody arrangements we devised have been formally signed and lodged with the court, and all provisions ensuring his mother and uncle remain distant from our child are now legally binding. This affords me considerable peace of mind regarding our son's safety and welfare. My ex-husband has consistently demonstrated his seriousness about upholding those boundaries. He has never once suggested we reconsider or modify those restrictions, which reinforces my conviction that he truly comprehends the extent of the damage his family caused and the paramount importance of shielding our child from their influence. I plan to take a hiatus from posting updates, as I wish to concentrate entirely on adjusting to life with the newborn and establishing routines for feeding and sleeping, and all the attendant challenges of infant care. Both my ex-husband and I feel very positive about our co-parenting relationship and our shared dedication to ensuring our son receives a magnificent and loving upbringing. I wish to express my gratitude to everyone who followed my narrative and offered support and counsel throughout this difficult period, because knowing that people cared about what happened to me and my baby made a profound difference in helping me endure some very dark and confusing months.